Under the flickering light of a midnight screen, a woman typed 8 words that would change everything. I'm tired of being strong all the time. It was just another social media post, swallowed in a flood of hearts, comments, and digital comfort. But for Emily, it wasn't just a confession. It was a pattern, a ritual, a momentary exhale in a life where every inhale carried the weight of invisible pain. Emily was 32, living in San Francisco, and like many of us, she had mastered the art of sharing pain dressed as honesty. Heartbreak, she'd write about it. Job stress, she'd post a witty story. The loneliness she felt on a Friday night, captured with a clever meme and a vulnerable caption. Each post was a release, each comment a shot of temporary warmth. But what no one saw, what even she didn't see, was the cost of all that talking. Her mind wasn't healing, it was memorizing. Because here's the truth no one tells you. Every time you repeat a painful story, you reinforce its power over you. The more you describe the wound, the deeper it settles into your identity. Your words don't just express your reality, they create it. And one night, it all came crashing down. Emily had posted another emotional vent, one that ended with the line, "Maybe I'm just too broken." I got hundreds of reactions, dozens of messages, but it was one comment, left by a stranger, that stopped her cold. "You're not healing. You're rehearsing." It was brutal, unfiltered, and disturbingly true. That was the night Emily turned off her phone and didn't turn it back on for 2 weeks. The noise, the validation, the performance, it had become a prison. And for the first time, she realized she wasn't escaping her pain. She was narrating it into permanence. So what happens when we stop talking and start listening? Not to others, but to ourselves? Stoicism offers a radical answer. Epictetus once said, "If you want to be free, practice freedom." And freedom, in this context, isn't about saying whatever you want. It's about choosing silence when your words no longer serve you. It's about recognizing that not all expression is empowerment, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is to stop telling the story altogether. This doesn't mean bottling things up. It means examining your motives. Are you speaking to process or to perform? Are you sharing for clarity or for comfort? Are you seeking growth or just attention? When Emily asked herself those questions, the answers weren't easy, but they were liberating. She began to write, but only for herself. She told her closest friends, "I'm working on things internally right now," and left it at that. And in that sacred silence, something extraordinary happened. She started hearing a different voice, one not shaped by likes or pity or well-meaning advice, a quieter voice, her own. Talking about pain can feel like healing, but if it becomes your habit, your identity gets stuck in a loop of remembering, not rebuilding. Silence is scary. It forces you to feel, but it also forces you to move forward. And that's what Emily did. She didn't become a monk. She didn't disappear. She just chose not to bleed in front of an audience anymore. And slowly, powerfully, her story changed, not through explanation, but through action. If you've ever felt the urge to post something just to be heard, if you've ever spoken your pain before you've lived through it, this is your wake-up call. Stop rehearsing your wounds. Start building your strength. Not everything that happens to you is meant for the world to see. Some things are meant to shape you, not showcase you. If this message hits home, if you're feeling that quiet nudge to take your power back, hit that subscribe button. Support this channel so we can keep making content that challenges you to grow, not just consume. And now, a question to get your thoughts flowing. Which feels more powerful to you right now? A, telling your story and being understood. Keeping your story to yourself and quietly evolving. Drop your answer in the comments. A or B, I'm reading every one of them. Let's hear what you really think. Jake used to wake up every morning to the sound of sirens and adrenaline. As a firefighter in Boston, his life had been defined by chaos, urgency, and being the person others counted on when things went wrong. But when a collapsed ceiling fractured his leg during a rescue mission, everything stopped. The rush, the purpose, the noise. Recovery wasn't just physical, it was existential. For the first time in years, Jake had to sit still, and it terrified him. Not just the stillness, but what it revealed, that he didn't know who he was when he wasn't doing. So he started to talk, to friends, to family, to anyone who would listen. His words spilled out, frustration, fears, plans, jokes that masked pain. At first it felt like release, then it started to feel hollow. The more he talked about his comeback, the less he actually came back. Somewhere along the way, Jake stumbled on a book of Stoic writings. He didn't expect much, but one quote by Marcus Aurelius struck a chord that no therapist had been able to reach. Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be one. That was the turning point. Jake realized he'd been performing recovery instead of living it, talking about how strong he was going to be, planning how he'd change his habits, updating others on what his next chapter might look like. But he wasn't in the next chapter. He was stuck in the introduction because his actions hadn't caught up to his words. He began to wonder, what would happen if he simply stopped explaining? So, he did something radical. He went quiet, not silent in a cold or isolated way, but intentional. He didn't mention his rehab goals to friends. He didn't post about his new routine. He stopped narrating his pain and started meeting it head-on, in solitude without commentary. The difference was immediate. His workouts became more focused, his mornings more grounded. Without the pressure to report progress or justify his pace, he moved with clarity. The noise outside faded, and inside, something stronger grew. That's the quiet power of consistency. In a world addicted to announcements and updates, Stoicism whispers a different message. Do the work. Don't talk about it. Let your growth reveal itself, not through declarations, but through presence. Jake discovered that when you stop seeking validation, you start discovering discipline, and not the kind that's loud or impressive. The kind that's quiet, personal, and nearly invisible to anyone but you. You see, when you announce a goal, your brain gets a dopamine hit. It feels good, like you've accomplished something. But the reality? You've just tricked yourself into feeling progress without earning it. It's called intention fatigue. You leak energy explaining what you haven't yet done. Jake reclaimed that energy. He applied what he now calls his no validation rule. If he was working on something, he'd keep it private for at least 72 hours. Long enough to feel if it was real, worth pursuing, worth protecting. And when those 3 days passed, more often than not, he was deeper in the process, quietly committed, quietly evolving. People started noticing the difference, not because he told them, but because it showed. In the way he carried himself, the way he listened more than he spoke, the calm he brought into a room. The truth is, consistency is a kind of integrity. It's how you prove to yourself that you mean what you say, without ever having to say it. Jake didn't need a comeback story anymore. He was simply living one. If you're feeling the urge to share every new decision, every step of growth, pause. Ask yourself, is this for clarity or for comfort? Are you building something real or just talking about the blueprint? Your most powerful transformations won't need an audience. They'll need your attention, your discipline, your silence. And when it's real enough, the world will see it, without you having to say a word. Miguel never raised his voice, but the loudest thing in his life was the one no one else could hear, his inner dialogue. From the outside, he looked like he had it all together. A successful designer living in Austin, leading projects at a major agency, always composed, always smiling. But on the inside, there was a loop playing on repeat. A loop that said, "You're not a leader. You're not like them. Stay in the background. Play it safe." It wasn't shouted. It was whispered, which made it harder to fight. This voice didn't come from nowhere. It was built over time, from criticisms he never forgot, from moments he stumbled and couldn't forgive himself for, from small comments that others tossed out and forgot, but he internalized like gospel. Over the years, that voice became so familiar it felt like truth, like identity. He didn't question it. He lived by it, until the day his boss offered him a creative director role. Miguel laughed, instinctively. Not because it was funny, but because that voice in his head instantly told him, "That's not who you are." He made an excuse, turned it down, said he wasn't ready, said maybe later. But that night, alone in his apartment, he couldn't shake the discomfort. Not from the offer, from how fast he had rejected it. He opened a book that had been sitting unread on his shelf, Seneca's Letters. A line caught his eye and refused to let go. "You act like mortals in all that you fear, and like immortals in all that you desire." Something broke. He realized he had been living in fear of stepping up, of being seen, of failing. And yet, he was acting like he had all the time in the world to change that story. But time was moving. Opportunities were passing, and his old narrative was running the show. He decided that night to rewrite the voice inside his head, not with affirmations, not with empty mantras, but with something deeper, intentional, daily reflection. He started journaling each morning, not about what he was doing, but about what he was believing. He asked himself questions like, what story did I tell myself yesterday? Did it help me grow or keep me small? He would find the limiting phrases. I'm not good at leading. I always freeze in meetings. I don't speak as confidently as others, and break them down, word by word, until he saw them for what they were, assumptions, not truths. He began writing responses to those thoughts, rational ones, Stoic ones, inspired by Marcus Aurelius, who once wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." Miguel had been wearing fear like a second skin. Now he wanted to wear strength, clarity, self-respect. This wasn't overnight work. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it was transformative. Slowly, he noticed a shift. In meetings, he paused before speaking, not out of anxiety, but to choose words that matched who he was becoming. In client pitches, he allowed himself to take the lead. He didn't announce his mindset shift. He didn't explain his journaling practice. He just embodied it. People began to notice. His tone changed. His presence deepened. The same people who once overlooked him now turned to him for guidance, not because he was louder, but because he was more grounded. This is the power of reshaping your inner voice. Not just challenging the critic, but replacing it with a wiser inner guide. Stoicism doesn't teach you to ignore your mind. It teaches you to master it, to train it, to engage with it as a partner, not a dictator. Epictetus said, "It's not events that disturb us, but our interpretation of them." Miguel had spent years letting his interpretations define him. Now, he was finally defining them. Here's the truth. The most important conversations you'll ever have are the ones no one hears, the ones between you and you. So ask yourself today, what's the voice inside your head saying? Is it building you or breaking you? Is it rooted in truth or in an outdated identity you've outgrown? If it's time to change that voice, don't wait for someone to rescue you from it. Start today. Open a notebook. Write down the lie. Rewrite the truth. Do it again tomorrow. And again the next day. Until one day that voice sounds less like an enemy and more like an ally. Miguel didn't become someone else. He just stopped believing he had to stay the same. And that's the beauty of this kind of mastery. It's quiet, it's slow, and it happens entirely within. But once it's real, everyone can feel it, even if you never say a word. At the peak of her career, Sophia stood on a podium in front of thousands. The stadium lights were blinding, the crowd deafening, the metal heavy around her neck. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted. Her name was trending. But none of that compared to what happened after. Because when the applause faded, and the injuries set in, and the recovery became silent, no one was there to cheer. No hashtags, no interviews, no spotlight. For someone like Sophia, who had trained her whole life for attention tied to performance, silence felt like death, but it became her rebirth. There's a truth most people learn the hard way. When you depend on applause to feel alive, you lose the ability to validate yourself in the quiet. And the quiet always comes. After her knee surgery, Sophia found herself in a different arena, One with no judges, no spectators, no finish lines. Just her pain, and the long stretch of uncertainty ahead. She started documenting her recovery on social media. Daily posts, honest captions. It felt real, even empowering. But deep down, it wasn't healing her. It was feeding a cycle. She realized that the performance had simply shifted from track meets to online updates. She was still chasing a reaction. Then, one day, while scrolling through a thread of comments, she stopped on a post that quoted Epictetus. First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. It sat with her for hours. What if she didn't need to announce anything anymore? What if her healing didn't need to be seen to be valid? What if the only applause she needed was from her own soul, quietly nodding in approval? So she tried something different. No more updates, no progress photos, no inspirational quotes. She turned her phone off every morning and focused on the work. Grueling, unglamorous, unseen. The kind that no one claps for, but changes everything. In that space, something powerful emerged. She no longer needed anyone to witness her effort for it to matter. Each rep, each step, each painful stretch was a contract with herself. She was showing up because it was who she was, not because anyone was watching. That's when her healing began. Because when you stop seeking applause, your relationship with effort changes. You begin to move from integrity, not ego. You act because it aligns with your values, not your image. You don't care who notices. You only care that you showed up. Sophia's transformation didn't make headlines. It didn't go viral. But it redefined her sense of self. She learned that silence isn't absence. It's power held inward. It's focus undiluted by feedback. It's resilience that doesn't perform for approval. The Stoics knew this. They believed the loudest kind of strength was the kind that didn't need to be broadcast. Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, could have had his victories etched into stone, sung in poems. Instead, he wrote to himself, in private, in doubt, in effort. Because he knew that public approval is fleeting, but self-mastery is permanent. Sophia began to carry herself differently. Not louder, calmer, not bigger, more grounded. People noticed, not because she told them, but because something about her presence spoke without sound. That's the paradox. When you no longer seek to prove, people begin to feel your truth more deeply. The silence she once feared had become her sanctuary. You see, applause is addictive. It conditions you to move for validation, not vision. It creates a loop where effort feels worthless unless someone notices. And that's how dreams dissolve, not from failure, but from the dependency on being seen. So here's the question. Who are you when no one is clapping? Who are you in the silence? If you can answer that with clarity, with conviction, you're already stronger than most. Because the moment you no longer need an audience to keep going, you found the kind of strength that never fades. Sophia never announced her return. She didn't post about it. She just showed up one day at a local track meet, quietly laced up her shoes, and ran. She didn't win, but she didn't have to, because she wasn't there to perform. She was there to live, and that, for her, was victory. The next time you feel the urge to announce your next move, pause. Ask yourself, do I want recognition or results? Do I want applause or alignment? The greatest power is built in silence, not because no one's watching, but because you don't need them to. That's how unshakable strength is born, quietly, relentlessly, authentically. And once it's yours, no one can take it away. Brandon always believed in being open. At work, with friends, even with people he barely knew, he shared what he was going through, projects that excited him, frustrations with management, personal struggles, new ideas. He called it authenticity. His co-workers called it refreshing. And for a while, it felt like connection. But connection without discretion is a trap. It wasn't obvious at first, just subtle shifts. Conversations that used to flow now felt guarded. A few of his ideas were dismissed too quickly. Feedback started to carry a patronizing tone. One morning, during a planning session, A senior manager referenced something Brandon had shared in confidence weeks before and used it to undermine his suggestion. That moment hit differently, not just because it was a breach of trust, but because Brandon had handed them the knife. He realized something vital that day. Not everyone deserves access to your inner world. Not every thought is meant to be aired. Not every emotion should be passed around like a group project. Brandon had given too much of himself, too freely. That night he wrote one sentence in his journal: "I have mistaken exposure for strength." He'd been reading about Stoicism, mostly out of curiosity, but now the teaching started to land in a deeper place. Epictetus wrote, "It is impossible for a man to learn what he thinks he already knows." Brandon thought he knew what strength looked like. It was openness, vulnerability, honesty, but he missed the second part, the one Stoics lived by: discernment. Trust isn't about giving your truth to whoever asks. It's about knowing who can carry it with respect, who can honor silence as much as sharing, who listens not to react, but to protect. That week, Brandon did something that made him nervous. He stopped sharing, not out of spite, not as a punishment to others, but as a form of self-respect. He called it his quiet filter. Before saying anything about his goals, his stress, or his ideas, he asked himself, does this person have the capacity to hold what I'm about to give them? Most didn't, and instead of feeling lonely, he felt powerful. He created what he now calls his silence vault. A space, mental, emotional, spiritual, where he could work on things privately until they were solid enough to face the world. He started writing down goals and not talking about them. He made decisions without polling people. He observed before trusting. He protected his momentum. That shift didn't make his relationships colder. It made them clearer. The energy he used to spend explaining, justifying, venting, it was now directed inward. And the result? More clarity, more progress, less regret. Brandon saw that some of the most important things in life grow best in silence. A seed can't sprout if you keep digging it up to show people it's there. Some dreams are still too tender. Some choices are too fresh. Some boundaries are too new to be challenged by outside voices. There's a kind of battle that happens when you grow. The world wants to define you by who you were. And if you let too many people into your process, too early, they'll try to steer you back toward the familiar, the predictable, the safe. That's why some transformations require solitude, not because you're hiding, but because you're fortifying. The Stoics weren't silent because they lacked things to say. They were silent because they understood the value of timing, intention, and preservation. Seneca wrote, "It is better to know useless things than to know nothing." But when it came to others knowing your business, he believed in caution. Reserve judgment in your tongue, he'd advise. Brandon learned that strength isn't what you show, it's what you guard, what you choose not to explain, what you keep sacred until it's ready to be revealed. He now lives by a different rhythm. He builds in private, moves in peace, speaks with care, and when he does choose to share, it's intentional, not habitual. Not because he needs approval, but because it's time, and something strange happened. The less he said, the more people respected his presence. Not because he became mysterious, but because he became centered. If you're someone who shares easily, who wears your process on your sleeve, this isn't a call to shut down. It's a call to rise up into discernment. Ask yourself, is this for support, or is it an impulse? Is this a moment of connection or a habit of overexposure? Because real growth, the kind that lasts, needs space. And not every space is worthy of what you're building. Guard it, honor it. Let your silence speak for you. And when it's time to share, let it come from strength, not need. That's how boundaries become freedom. That's how quiet decisions become loud results. Early morning light spilled across Central Park as Emily walked with quiet intention, the city buzzing just beyond the trees. No earbuds, no phone out, no story waiting to be posted. Just her thoughts, and the steady rhythm of footsteps on concrete. 6 months ago, she wouldn't have recognized herself. She used to move through life with one foot in the present and the other in performance. If something happened, it had to be shared. If she felt something, it needed to be validated. Silence felt like invisibility, and invisibility felt like irrelevance. But something had shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but deeply. Emily had stopped narrating her journey and started living it. It wasn't an overnight transformation. It came from hundreds of small choices. From the decision to journal instead of post. From sitting with her emotions instead of packaging them for public consumption. From choosing to feel something fully instead of filtering it for others. In her journal, now thick with pages of self-honesty, one quote was underlined. Again and again, the reward for a good deed is having done it. Seneca didn't mean recognition, he meant fulfillment. The kind of fulfillment that only exists when your actions are aligned with who you want to become, not with how you want to be perceived. This is the quiet triumph Stoicism teaches. A life that doesn't need to be displayed to be meaningful. A change that doesn't need witnesses to be real. Strength that isn't measured by the noise it makes, but by how deeply it roots itself within you. In a world obsessed with visibility, disappearing into your own process feels like rebellion. But it's the kind of rebellion that builds something indestructible. The noise of the world is relentless. Opinions fly faster than truths. Everyone has something to say about everything. And the pressure to join that chorus, to explain yourself, to prove your progress, to shout your growth, can drain the very energy needed to evolve. Emily learned to turn down that volume, to mute what didn't feed her, to reclaim the energy she once gave to validation and reinvest it into presence. It's easy to assume silence is passive, that if you're not speaking, you're not growing. But real growth is often inaudible, a subtle shift in your thinking, a new way you breathe through discomfort, the space you create between reaction and response, the boundaries you set, not loudly, but firmly, the way you start to trust yourself without needing confirmation. Her friends noticed the change, but they couldn't quite name it. She hadn't told them she was different. She simply was. She laughed more easily. She took up space without apologizing. She didn't over-explain or overshare. And when she spoke, people leaned in. Not because her words were louder, but because they were rare. And when something is rare, it becomes valuable. This is what it means to live Stoicism without making a sound. You become the kind of person who doesn't rush to prove their worth, because you've already decided it for yourself. You don't panic in uncertainty, because you've practiced staying still. You don't need the world to clap for your healing, because you feel it in your bones, in your breath, in your ability to stand where you once collapsed. Emily wasn't hiding. She wasn't performing. She was simply living in alignment. And that by itself was enough. One day, she found an old vision board she had made during a tough chapter. It was covered in quotes, goals, dreams, all big and bright and visible. She smiled, not because she had achieved all of it, but because she no longer needed any of it to feel like she was becoming someone worthwhile. Now, instead of a vision board on her wall, she kept one in her mind, a private one, quiet and powerful, filled not with outcomes but with values, integrity, discipline, presence, peace. She didn't need to prove anything. Her life was the proof. The world tells you to be loud to matter, but Stoicism teaches that mattering starts when you stop needing to be loud. It teaches you that self-respect isn't found in applause, but in how you show up when no one's clapping. That clarity doesn't come from saying more, but from knowing when to say nothing. So ask yourself now, not who's watching you, but who you're becoming in the silence. If no one ever knew about your growth, would you still pursue it? If your healing was never applauded, would you still commit to it? If your story remained unwritten, would you still live it with honor? Because that's the truest measure of strength, to rise, rebuild, and evolve not for an audience, but for your own soul. Silent victory isn't small. It's sacred, it's yours, and it lasts. Emily's story is not about a dramatic transformation. It's about something much harder, quiet evolution. She didn't reinvent herself overnight or burn everything down to start again. She simply stopped needing to be seen in order to be real. And in that stillness, she found something most people spend their whole lives chasing: peace that doesn't depend on performance. From the beginning, Emily believed that expressing her emotions, her struggles, and her breakthroughs publicly was a form of honesty. But as the months passed, she realized it had become something else: an emotional echo chamber. The more she spoke of her pain, the more she became it. Her identity was being shaped not by who she was, but by what she kept repeating. That realization shook her. It forced her to look at how much of her life was narrated for approval. Not maliciously, not consciously, but out of habit. She believed that if she wasn't documenting her healing, it wasn't happening. That if people didn't validate her pain, it wasn't real. But healing isn't a show. It's a private contract between who you've been and who you want to become. What changed everything was her decision to go silent, not as an escape, but as a commitment. She stopped sharing every emotional update. She started writing only for herself. She pulled her attention inward, not to dwell, but to deepen. And what she found was that in the absence of applause, she could finally hear her own voice. Along the way, Emily began to live the essence of Stoicism without even labeling it that. She practiced restraint. She focused on actions, not announcements. She made space for discomfort without trying to explain it away. She didn't deny what she felt. She just stopped needing everyone to witness it. And slowly, the noise faded. Her confidence grew. Her presence became more grounded. Not because she had more to say, but because she had less to prove. Here's the real lesson. The most profound changes don't need to be broadcast. They need to be embodied. When you stop giving the world a front row seat to your every step, you gain the energy, the privacy, and the clarity to actually move forward. And when you do that, when you act from alignment, not applause, you become unshakable. If you're watching this and you felt that tug to step back from the noise, to stop explaining, to stop performing your pain, this is your sign to do it. You don't need permission. You need a pause, a breath, a moment where your growth is no longer on display, but is still happening. You don't have to share it to be proud of it. You don't have to prove it to make it real. And you definitely don't need to post about it to make it matter. Now, here's a small question to help you reflect. Which path feels harder, but more honest? A. Speaking less and choosing quiet consistency. B. Seeking support and processing through constant sharing. Drop your answer in the comments, A or B. I'm reading every response, and I'd love to hear more from you. What part of Emily's journey hit closest to home? Have you ever chosen silence over speaking, and what did it teach you? Leave your thoughts below. Let's learn from each other. If this story spoke to something inside you, subscribe to the channel. It helps us keep making honest, grounded content like this. And it tells us that there are people out there ready to live differently, quietly, powerfully, like a Stoic.